All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We'll wait a few more minutes for everyone to hop in, but while we wait, if you all want to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat, let us know who you are, where you're located, and yeah, let's hear a little bit about has your student taken an SAT or ACT before? So if you want to just go ahead and throw that in there, get to know our group here a little bit while we wait for everyone to join in.
Hi, Ellie.
All right.
Yes, no.
This is great. All right, so we will go ahead and get started as we start and do some introductions, letting a few others join in. But we want to go ahead and dive in and use the most of our time here. So first of all, thank you everyone for attending tonight's parent webinar. Tonight we're focusing on how to optimize the holiday break around test preparation and college applications, and it's hosted by A-List Education. So here at A-List, we are actually viewed as market leaders around educational services. So we specialize in everything from academic tutoring, test preparation, advising programs, all for college-bound students. So we wanted to bring some of our knowledge and resources here to you all tonight. I also want to start by saying a big thank you to our parents who showed up. So this tells us that college admissions is on your radar at the right time, and that you're doing all the proper steps and making sure that your students have the right support and resources during this process. So let's talk about who we have with us here today. Let's see, we have, so of course, my name is Kate Crockett. I am the host today, and I am the Vice President of Student Success here at A-List. So I've actually been working in education services for about 5 years, and mainly I specialize in helping families and students find personalized prep plans around test prep. We also do roadmaps for college advising and academic tutoring. So I'll be helping answer questions in the chat and hopefully speaking to some of you individually as well about your students' plans after today. As for speakers, we have Scott Suzel here. So Scott is also an educator here at A-List Education. And he is a college admissions advisor, instructor, and curriculum developer with over 15 years of experience. And really big in the grad world as well, helping with grad admissions tests like the LSAT, GMAT, and GRE. And then if you want to go ahead and click through there, we also have Kate Minier. So Kate is our Director of College Advising, and she has been in the advising industry for over 10 years. So over the course of her career, she's worked with a vast range of students in the US and internationally. So super impressive there. And throughout that time, she's helped students get admitted to competitive programs of all subjects. And some of her past admissions include Cornell, NYU, Vanderbilt, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, tons more. So happy to have you here, Kate. And then we also have Nick Mesakowski. So he's one of our subject matter experts who's joining us tonight. He is an educator here at A-List as well, and he is from the University of Vanderbilt. His experience in teaching actually came out of his passion for theater. So pretty cool. Nick has helped many students see lots of improvements around their test scores, but when he's not teaching, he also works as a playwright and freelance copywriter. So thanks for joining us, Nick.
I want to point out that this was the lowest resolution photo that I could find of Nick that I was able to put onto the deck. No, his bio was also so long. There was so much good stuff to include. It was very difficult to get it down small enough for this particular slide. So.
Great. Thank you. So that's our lineup. We're super excited to be bringing the information to all of you guys here tonight. But before we really dive in, I do have an ask of all of you. So we started off by doing some introductions in the chat. We really want to make the most of your time here. So the best way to do that is to use the chat function on tonight's webinar. It's a great opportunity to be able to drive very direct and specific questions to our subject matter experts, and really make sure that we're covering the information that you need to hear. So just make sure that you get all of your questions answered in chat. Use that as an engagement piece to make sure that we're covering what we need to do. And without further ado, I will pass over the mic to Scott, Nick, and Kate.
So I mean, we're entering the holiday season. So basically, what we're going to be talking about is the period of time from now until after the new year, and this is a period of time where people have a little bit more time off, and often larger chunks of time to get certain things accomplished. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about what you could do approaching the holiday season, whether you're 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, or 12th. And then also, a little bit about study techniques and things you can do for your extracurriculars and all of that kind of stuff when it comes to having these free blocks of time all of a sudden. One thing that I am not preaching is that you should spend all of your holiday break time doing work. So that's definitely not what we're trying to say. Let me go ahead and just move this over here. The agenda today, we did introductions already. This next point is what I was kind of already kind of breaking into, which is the importance of life balance with testing and admissions. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, but we'll also talk about the kind of a breakdown of holiday test prep by grade and a breakdown of holiday admissions tasks that you can do by grade. We'll talk a little bit about the 3 types of preparation you can do for standardized testing. And I'll kind of give you the anatomy of a study session, which is what any particular study session should look like. And then Kate and all of us will also talk about recommended extracurriculars for to kind of help fill out your college apps. Nick is going to wax poetic about techniques to avoid or techniques to avoid writer's block, rather, which is the scourge of every writer. We're going to talk a little bit more about writing essays, and then at the end we're going to have an open Q&A where honestly we really please feel comfortable asking us absolutely anything. We're happy to answer it. There are no bad questions. There's plenty of mystery around the entire process, especially with everything changing when it comes to both standardized testing, the ACT, SAT, and college admissions in general. So really, honestly, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Please feel free to ask anything at all. We're happy to answer. So, all right. So first thing is first, and that is what are we actually talking about when it comes to all the different pieces of an app? So this is the relative importance of each piece of your application. This is the National Association of College Advisors actually put this together every single year. This is the very last one that they did. So this is the most recent data that we have. And I kind of just want to point to all of these things and the relative importance. Grades are still number one. And if you're a senior right now, your GPA is kind of what it is. I mean, you can certainly influence it to some degree. But your GPA is pretty set in stone, which means that all of those other things become that much more important. If you're a 9th grader, then your GPA is just getting started. And, you can see due to its relative importance, it's really kind of, it's in your best interest to stay on top of your academics as much as possible throughout high school. I mean, that probably goes without saying. But still, there are a whole bunch of other elements to a good application, and those are all to the right of the red line. So once your GPA is set, your grades for your courses, the grades in college prep classes, and the strength of curriculum, all that stuff is very difficult to change at a certain point. And it becomes mostly that your focus shifts to all those other pieces that go along with your college app. This is probably a question for you, Kate Manier. Would you say that, in total, all the stuff to the right of the red line is of equal importance if you add it all up to the stuff to the left, or how would you apportion the relative importance of everything outside of your GPA?
Good question. So I would say that it's different for every college. So this is a full, basically, polling all of the 600 colleges and universities that are in the US. So this is truly just an average of what every college rated as considerable importance or moderate importance. So it will vary from college to college, right? And there are also demonstrated interest also is becoming more and more important as the years goes by. So this is kind of like a good guideline, but I wouldn't say it's something that you should take as gospel for every single college. In general, I think definitely grades, right, are like the number one factor. which is awesome because you have 4 years to cultivate that, right? But the mix is always a little bit different from school to school.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we're coming up to the holidays, and for some people, this may be the first time in a while that we've actually gotten together with family and friends, and in a way that that we're used to. And I'm not trying to take, we wouldn't want to take that time away from anyone. I want to stress the importance of still a family and still being able to spend that time recharging your batteries and catching up with people. And this is true all the time, really. I mean, life balance it's established that having a good life balance is important for prep. The way that I kind of usually talk about this stuff is people are in certain situations and you have to do what you can with the cards that you're dealt. If you are a little bit behind the curve for whatever reason, all you can do is really focus on the stuff that's in front of you. But if you still have the time to really carefully plan all your prep, it is much less anxiety inducing to do it that way, to go ahead and get an early start, get introduced to the SAT and ACT material as soon as you can, so it's not completely foreign all of a sudden when you're an 11th grader and you're trying to take these tests. Try to get a jump on your all the other pieces of your application and your extracurriculars and all that kind of stuff. So again, this way you're not all of a sudden in the summer between your 11th and 12th grade year trying to check boxes for ECs, for extracurriculars, the very, very last year. So my point is that it's important to have a balance between what you're what you're doing for college admissions and for test prep and everything and the rest of your life. It's not the case that this stuff should drive you crazy and miserable and all that kind of stuff. What it should be is an opportunity to put your best foot forward. There's a lot of stuff you need to collect during the process, and it takes time, and it's a lot easier to make sure you get all that stuff done, and you kind of build cushion into the process if you start earlier. And so, if you haven't started early and you are where you are, it's still fine. It's okay. You can still get it done. It just means, obviously, that you're gonna have to apportion a little bit more time going forward to make sure that you get everything ready to go. Does anyone have anything else to kind of say about making sure you maintain a good life balance when it comes to all this stressful stuff? I said it all. I said it perfectly. Thank you. Okay, let's move on. So we're going to kind of bounce back and forth between test preparation and college admissions as far as the kinds of things that you should be doing, whether you're a 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader, work our way up. So when it comes to test prep for people who are going to eventually be taking the ACT and the SAT, and you're in 9th grade, first of all, let me just say it's never too early to start. My mom is a school teacher, and she actually thought it was important for me to take standardized tests really early on so that I get used to them. I think I took my first SAT when I was in 7th grade. That's probably overkill. I didn't need to take the SAT in 7th grade, but I kind of enjoyed it. And to be honest, the fact that I started so early, it took a lot of the anxiety away, kind of like the specter of the unknown when it came to this kind of testing. I wasn't scared of the ACT or SAT at all by the time I was a junior, because I was like, well, I was able to even take it and understand at least some of the questions when I was in 7th grade. It's not that scary. So I do think it's important to at least dip your toe in the water as a 9th grader and get some exposure to standardized tests, whether that's taking the 9th grade PSAT or simply downloading something online and doing a few sections to get a feel for what it's like. Nick, how old were you when you took your very first standardized test, or the ACT or SAT?
8th grade. So I don't know why I did that. But
right. Yeah, to that point, like formatting is a big deal. Like the format of the test is very, very different than stuff that you've seen in academics. And so simply seeing, oh, the entire thing is multiple choice, and there are different ways I can possibly solve, get answers. It's definitely new. There's nothing quite like the SAT or ACT in academics. So it's nice to get that exposure. Kate, how about college applications for ninth graders? What can you do, towards this end as a ninth grader?
This is the answer that will make people probably the most happy, which is that in the ninth grade, there is some stuff that you can do, but it's a lot more exploratory. So my very first recommendation for getting prepared for college applications when you're in the ninth grade is to take some time during the holidays and figure out what you actually enjoy doing and have fun doing. This doesn't necessarily mean playing Fortnite for 24 hours a day. You do have to explore kind of more of a breadth of activities, but this should be the time in which you're figuring out your purpose, and what is something that you could do for hours on end that you really enjoy doing and that you get a lot out of. So holidays during ninth grade, it's a lot about figuring out what you like. Also looking back on your classes, figuring out what classes you really enjoyed. And then the final thing is, if you have not already reached out to your guidance counselor, it's time to reach out to your guidance counselor. Maybe not during the holidays, but right after. You can draft an email during the holidays, because that's someone who is going to be really, really important in your college application journey. And the sooner you get to know them, the more you'll have somebody on your side to really advocate for you once you actually apply to school. But I don't know. I mean, I don't think I was in touch with my guidance counselor in the ninth grade, but it's definitely a good move if you can.
When I was younger, it doesn't make it a bad idea. It just means that I didn't do it, and my life was a little bit more difficult as a result. But yeah, it's certainly getting to know your guidance counselor early on. I mean, they're there to help. It's just that and in developing a personal relationship is a huge benefit.
Huge thing. Yeah, and I think it's just, honestly, grades and making sure that your grades are great. Also, your guidance counselor will be really helpful for that, because if you're struggling with something and you go to your guidance counselor, then they'll help you out and figure out a game plan. So it's a good plan all around to just get that guidance counselor on your side.
Awesome. Okay, so the things that you can do for test prep if you're a 10th grader going into this time of year, well, this is when it gets a little bit more serious. By 10th grade, you've seen most of the stuff that's going to end up being on the test. You certainly will by the end of your 10th grade year. You'll see most of the stuff that's on the SAT and the ACT, which a lot of people aren't aware. A lot of people think that lots of the test is actually stuff that you might see in 11th, or even 12th grade, and that's certainly not the case. The vast majority of stuff that's on the test is actually from early on in your high school career. The interesting thing about that is by the time you get to 11th grade and you're maybe taking your official version of the test and trying to max your score out, some of the stuff that's on the test you haven't seen in a long time. And so for that reason, when this is a great time to really start, first of all, it's going to help your test score, but also beginning to prep around this time of year as a 10th grader, it's also a really, really good academic refresher. For things like interpreting passages when it comes to reading and English skills, and also math. It's one more chance to see stuff that you may not have seen for a while, and it gives you a lot of confidence when you kind of reinforce these things, and then you see them again. It gives you a lot more confidence in class, and so it's a really, really good thing to do for multiple reasons. But again, the PSAT, is less at this point in time. The PSAT, the official one for National Merit Scholars that people take during their 11th grade year, is less than a year away. And so now is a great time, since you have a little bit of extra time as a 10th grader during the holidays. Now is a great time to really thoroughly introduce yourself to this material and start to come up with a plan. This is a good time to plan your attack on these tests. It's also a really good time to figure out which test you want to take. If you want to take the SAT or the ACT. And Nick, what are your thoughts on trying to pick one of those tests?
Try both out, right? First of all, and when it comes to picking the tests,
Yeah. So Nick, you kind of already touched on these things, but Noelle is asking specifically, can you go over the basic differences between the ACT and the SAT? It's a great question. And to be honest, 10 years ago, we would have been able to come up with more things. The tests used to be significantly different from one another. The SAT has changed because, as weird as it is to think about, the SAT and ACT are companies that are that are fighting each other for market share, which their market those are your high school kids, but that's the kind of the way it is. And so the ACT was actually gaining share; they were gaining in popularity, and the SAT, in response to that, made the test a lot more similar to the ACT than it used to be. So the shortest answer is that the tests are really, really similar, and that usually if you're good at one, you're probably pretty good at the other. It's very, very rare to see a student score much more than 5 percentile points difference between one test or the other. And so these days, I usually just advise students to go ahead and pick the one that they feel the most comfortable with in terms of its format and everything else. But there are still some differences, and Nick hit on a couple of those. One, the SAT has a no calculator math section. So if you're the kind of student who is just completely attached to your calculator and you use it for everything, like, you got to add 7 and 4, and you're like, well, I think that's 11, but let me just punch it into the calculator just to be sure. If you're that kind of student, then the ACT may be the test for you, because there's no calculator section. Generally, the ACT is thought to be a bit more difficult in terms of its pacing. So you have a little bit less time per question to get through the ACT. So pacing, the speed at which you have to complete questions is a little bit tougher for the ACT. Another difference is that the SAT, especially in the math section, tends to write questions that are a little bit less straightforward. And what I mean by that is, they'll set traps for students in ways that the ACT doesn't always. So they'll think about a common error that a student would make and write a question around it, and then they'd include the answer choice that represents that common mistake, and try to trap students into selecting it. And so that's the kind of thing that the SAT does a little bit more than the ACT. One more difference: the ACT has a science section and the SAT does not. That isn't as big of a difference as it seems like, because you don't need to know any science to do the ACT science section. All the stuff on the ACT science section is stuff that's presented to you, and it's your job to interpret it. So ACT science is really just science reading comprehension. And guess what? On the SAT, in the reading comprehension section, there is always a science passage. And so they aren't that dissimilar, but there are some subtle differences that may make a difference for a student when it comes to picking one over the other. All right. So what about college applications for 10th graders?
Thank you. I'm just going to pipe in and say that I remember when I took the SAT, which was an undisclosed amount of years ago, but a while ago, they did a passage about how yawning is contagious. And it was 7:30 in the morning, and every student in the room was yawning, and it was awful. That feels like more of an SAT move than an ACT move. Wait, Scott, do you want to take that one question? Do all colleges accept?
Oh yeah, I was going to type it, but actually, I should just actually answer it. Yes, Noelle, all colleges accept both tests without exception these days. It used to be the case many years ago. The SAT was more of a coastal test, and a lot of colleges that were on the coast preferred it to the ACT, and colleges that were in the Midwest maybe preferred the ACT. But now it really doesn't matter. They're viewed exactly the same by every single college.
Awesome. All right. So for 10th grade college applications, I gave you a fairly easy job for 9th grade. So now we're going to kind of level up a little bit here. It's time to start actually recording, first of all of the activities that you've done thus far, and create basically an activity journal. The reason for this is that by the time you get to senior year, you will likely have many activities under your belt. And if you keep a really detailed log of all the activities that you did, then you're not going to get to the Common App and then just be like, oh my gosh, what do I say about these activities and what activities did I do? I cannot tell you how many students I have worked with have actually forgotten about activities that they did that were actually pretty impressive just because you guys all have so much on your plate and there's so much going on in school that it's like, oh, I forgot about that volunteer project that I did in 10th grade. So an activities journal is great. It also helps you kind of reflect on what you've done so far and figure out what you've liked about each activity, and where you feel like, oh, this isn't exactly for me. So starting an activities journal is definitely a really big deal. Also, once again, looking at your academics, it's time to start thinking about where you're interested in focusing your academics. If you can pick more specialized classes, you can start doing that now. So you can really develop some expertise in one academic area. I think well-rounded students are always a really great thing, but schools, especially more competitive schools, are also looking for someone who has something that's really stand out about them. So figuring out ways to specialize is a really important thing to do. And so I think doing that both in terms of your activities and in terms of your classes, that will kind of get you on the right track. You're still sort of in this discovery phase, right? But you're also starting to think about how to specialize. And the holidays are a perfect time for you to do that because it's a time of like reflection on your year and you can just keep going forward.
Okay, are there any extracurriculars that you will commonly see people include in apps that shouldn't be there? Or, is there stuff that people include that they, that it really has no business being something that's part of an application?
I always go by what is there. So for instance, if a student has 10 fantastic activities and then their 11th activity is dog walking, then I'm going to scrap the dog walking. I think it's all like you view the activities all relatively to one another. And it's all a very holistic process. But I think things that, and actually let's go to the next slide now because we're about to do a brief interlude on extracurriculars. This is a general timeline of like where we feel you should go with extracurriculars and what you should like think about year by year. So I've talked a lot about exploration in the 9th and 10th grade. From 9th, 10th grade to 11th, 12th grade, there's this really big shift in terms of how you should be thinking about your extracurriculars. It's time to go from that exploration phase and like finding out your purpose phase to then going into like finding more depth in your activities, getting leadership roles and increasing your impact. Now, dog walking is a good example because I'm not sure how you create a lot of impact in dog walking. However, if you can, then you should use it in your activities. So like an example would be, say you are walking someone's dog weekly and you've done it for years, that's one thing. But if you are really passionate about animals and then you start your own dog walking service, right? Then that's something that would be great to add to your activities list. In general, things that look really good in an activities list are things that students start themselves that show like a lot of initiative. And that's mostly because if you plug into an organization, then you have one specific role. But if you're doing it all yourself, then you're getting tested in all of these different aspects, right? So students doing these self-starter projects always look really great, or like going out on a limb to do something that they might be afraid to do that also looks really great. In general, like things that colleges look at they're not that impressed by might be like a one-off volunteering experience, because every single school has volunteering hours that they require. So if it's like a weekend volunteer experience, unless it was really impactful and you pursued it and continued to follow like that thread, then it's like, oh, I worked at a veterinary hospital and cleaned litter for 2 days and there's nothing else in my application that has anything to do with that, then you might not need that. And I'm sorry I'm not trying to talk poorly of animals. I don't know why animals were both of my examples. I love animals.
Okay, so as we move through time, we're now on test prep for 11th graders. And if you are an 11th grader right now going into the holidays, you are right in the thick of peak testing season. Most 11th graders are trying to be done with this whole process by next summer. So, why is the testing window so long? Well, I mean, there really is no reason a student shouldn't take the test multiple times. And, there are multiple reasons for this, but students who do take the tests multiple times have higher scores on average. One, it's just, anyone who takes the test multiple times has more exposure to the test and has more opportunities to address any issues. There's other things as well, like a lot of schools now are taking super scores. And if you're taking the test multiple times, it gives you an opportunity to super score and put your best scores together from different sections. So all of these things contribute to students who kind of take the long view and take the test multiple times. Look, I know taking tests isn't the most fun thing in the world, and they are time consuming as well. And they can cost money if they're ones that aren't being administered by your student's school. So I know, those are certainly all obstacles to actually, doing it this way. And I'm not suggesting you take 13 ACTs either, but students who take somewhere in the range of like 3 to 5 tests almost always have higher scores than students who just take it once and then they're done. That being said, there are plenty of practice tests available too, and there's things that you can do during this period of time to make sure you're getting yourself up to a point where you feel good about walking into the testing room and taking the test. So generally, by now, if you're an 11th grader, you are starting to study in earnest. Maybe you've had some exposure to the test so far, and you've done some studying, but now it's time to come up with a plan that ramps up to a specific test date that is your goal test date, where you're going to do your very, very best on that test. And you're hoping that is the score that gets you into the school of your dreams. So that is where you're at right now. If you're an 11th grader, again, you can take the ACT and SAT. The last ACT, for example, is coming up. It's on December 11th. I mean, I have a couple of students right now prepping for the December 11th test. And they're hoping, if December 11th doesn't go perfectly, to take the test for the last time in the spring, and then they're done. And then they can focus on other elements of their application as they finish up 11th grade going into their senior year.
I have a question, Scott.
Yes, shoot.
How important is it to do the tests on paper versus online? Is there a difference when you're practicing, or?
So that's a really, really good question. It is very important to get practice done from paper tests. The actual test itself is on paper, and when you're trying to take the test online, especially for me, it feels completely different. I think with my hands, I sketch things out a lot. I doodle all over the paper when I'm thinking, and it helps me. It helps me to see the question right there and be able to sketch things out in the immediate vicinity. What ends up happening when you're taking tests online is you'll have scratch paper, but you're constantly breaking your focus by moving up to the screen and back down to the paper. And doing that all the time is, first of all, it gives you a headache. And second of all, it costs you a lot of time. And just even that split second breaking your focus can really, really slow you down. Now, I will say, I'll add to that. If your goal is to just find out the areas of the test where you don't understand concepts or where you need to focus your energy, taking quizzes or short tests or even full tests online is okay for that reason. Just don't expect it to be an accurate score or like a representation of how you're going to feel during the test. So it is important at some point in time to take full-length tests on paper that is more like a dress rehearsal, where everything is officially timed and all that. So if you're doing something online, that's fine, but use it for what it's for, which is really just like, do I remember how to do algebra and that kind of thing. So, all right. Moving on to college apps for 11th graders.
All right. So it is the time. The busy time has begun. Probably if you are an 11th grader, you might have already visited some schools. I think that the holiday break is an excellent time to go visit schools. This could be an earlier break, or it can be spring break, but a lot of your break during your junior year should be devoted towards figuring out what schools might go on your list. So that's one thing. The other thing is figuring out the exact roadmap of your application and what you have to get done, and developing a really good plan of action and a timeline in front of you. That's partially what we're helpful with at A-List, right? Because it's really daunting and overwhelming to look at that mound of work in front of you when you're a junior, and you also have your classes and they're so important, right? So developing a timeline and keeping yourself accountable on that timeline is really, really important. This also varies if you're an international student, right? You might have even more work in front of you. There are things for visa applications. Some international students have TOEFL requirements. So the requirements for international students are even bigger. But the requirements for every student are vast. So it's good to kind of understand what is right in front of you and just start tackling each thing month by month. We've actually got a great year-by-year application timeline that we're going to offer up later that we can talk over. But in terms of other things for college applications, we've got visiting schools, we've got getting your timeline together, we've got test prep, which now is the same thing, right? It's the same thing as preparing for college applications. And then also the last thing is planning the summer after junior year, which is a really important summer. Figuring out any academic enrichment programs that you can take part in. Many schools have fantastic pre-college programs that you can go to where you can explore an academic interest. You can also take part in a summer program that's just more activities based, or you can do a mix. But there are a ton of fantastic opportunities. And I think that junior year, that summer after junior year, is a really important summer.
Yeah, the 11th grade. Yeah, 11th grade is a big year. It's really, really busy. So test prep for 12th graders. Look, at this point, this is like your last chance to make a dent in your score. Students are in different places at this point. I mean, I can speak just from my own personal experience, the students that I've had over the years. If a student is a senior and it is this time of the year, and they haven't even started to study yet, or they just went in and took the test once without studying at all, and just sort of just let the cards fall where they may, they often feel very, very pressured. Like their backs are up against the wall, and they're seeing the scores their friends are getting in, and you start to potentially feel like a little bit pushed out or left out if you don't have the score that you want, and all of a sudden there's not much time left. There isn't much time left, but there is still time, and there's still a difference. There's still things can still change at this point in time. Even if you haven't really studied and your test is in December and you've got 3 weeks, is that optimal? No, it's not optimal, but you can make a difference in 3 weeks. What you would do in that case, if you have 3 weeks to go, is you'd want to focus on the stuff that's on the test that's represented the most often. So what are the subjects that show up the most often on the test and represent the most points on the test? And then you also want to focus on the strategy of the test. Standardized testing is very different than academics. There are strategies that can be employed that'll get you answers. Sometimes even if you don't know how to do a question, you can still get answers by simply gaming the test and knowing how it's set up. So those are the things you should focus on, because that's going to have the biggest yield in a really, really short period of time. Other students who are 12th graders maybe have good test scores and they want to see if they can squeeze the last few points out of the test, or they have pretty good test scores for most of the test and there's just one area that they're really struggling with. In those cases, and because of the importance of getting your test score up, given the types of opportunities it can open up for you, it does help at this point for a lot of students to go ahead and get some kind of assistance. Classes are great for students who are looking for sort of a holistic approach to the test and like learn a little bit about everything. And it's good to take a class sometimes when you're just starting out with the process. But when you already know where your strengths and weaknesses are and you have really specific things to focus on, having the benefit of a tutor is a gigantic help, and for reasons that people don't always think about. First of all, when you have a tutor, your tutor is able to diagnose exactly the moment you make a mistake. So a lot of times my students, I ask my students to think out loud while they're working through problems. It's not just a matter of whether you get a question right or wrong. It's a matter of the exact moment in time when you step off the path you should be on to a correct answer. And you're not going to be able to find that out simply by doing questions, getting them wrong, and looking back and saying, oh, I missed this one, but I'm not exactly sure why. And so when it comes to, getting a boost in your score or squeezing the last few points out of a test, getting the help of a professional who's been doing this for a really, really long time and has seen, many different kinds of issues and all kinds of different learning styles is a tremendous help and usually worth the investment at that point in time. So, Nick, do you have anything to add about the last ditch efforts for 12th graders?
I would say, I kind of exactly what Scott said, which is that
Yeah. And to your point, Nick, the easy questions are worth just as many points as the hard ones. So it's all about just increasing your raw score. So
I have a quick question before we move on, Scott. So as somebody who speaks a lot with parents, a common question that I hear after last year, right, with a lot of kind of uncertainty and everything that kind of came with COVID, a lot of parents were wondering about test optional schools. Can you just briefly touch on a little bit, like, is it valuable for them to still submit test scores to test optional schools after such a year like last year?
About this question, and we have, but it's so it's that's a tough question to answer because we didn't really know what the answer was until recently. And all the schools' policies changed. A lot of schools' policies changed, and suddenly became test optional. But it turns out that the people who got accepted, especially to the very competitive schools, were still students who had test scores in that were competitive test scores. And so test optional didn't really mean that. Test optional just meant, yeah, you can apply, but we'll just barely consider you in a lot of cases. And I even had some students who ended up having to take a gap year because they weren't sure what the true nature of the landscape was. And so it is still really, really important for most schools to have a competitive test score in. You can apply test optional to schools and you may get in. There's a chance if your test score, isn't where it should be and it's nowhere near where it should be for a specific school, sure, you can apply test optional to that school and not actually send your scores to that school. And we found that a lot of students have chosen to go ahead and try and do that, but very few of them actually were successful with that strategy. So, Kate, as far as college apps for 12th graders.
Sure. Just a quick note on test optional. I think it comes from colleges too. They will not tell us what test optional means. They won't tell anybody in the industry what test optional actually means. And so our approach has to be, well, if they're not telling us what it means, then let's get those test scores as high up as they can go and then apply, right? So it was a really interesting year. And some students did have some success with applying test optional at schools where they were otherwise super competitive, right? But throwing your application in to a place where you otherwise weren't competitive was always like a difficult thing. So in terms of college applications for 12th grade, say you are looking at Thanksgiving break, depending on who you are, you might be able to take a quick little deep breath here. There's a chance you applied to a couple of schools early. That would be the goal, right? You want to apply to maybe 3 or 4 schools, early action or early decision. You will get that decision on December 15th, usually. And that is the first wave of applications. So we're actually kind of in the middle of the end of that first wave. Everyone's gotten their applications in. I think the latest early decision or early action deadline was November 15th. A lot of them are November 1st. So a lot of students are kind of like kicking back and saying, oh my gosh, that was crazy. Let me just sit back for a sec. I'm going to chill during Thanksgiving, and we'll wait to hear what we say. We recommend that you start kind of planning the rest of your supplemental essays during Thanksgiving break, because things will start to get crazy again. And just because of the uncertainty of last year, a lot of schools deferred. Not everybody, but deferrals were much more common. Deferral meaning we're going to push you back to the pool of regular decision applicants. So you won't hear our decision until April or so. And so that simply means that you still have to apply to your initial list of colleges that you had, and you have to apply to them regular decision, which means you've got a pile of work in front of you. If you haven't applied early, then that is also the case. And so you're going to want to start planning your essay writing strategy during Thanksgiving break if you haven't started your supplemental essays already. So basically, what we can do at A-List is help students go through all their potential topics and create a list with them, and then figure out the best strategy to make less work for them. Oh no, I have to say it too, because I went to Vanderbilt as well, Nick. And boy, was that phrase thrown around a lot. Work smarter, not harder. Let's streamline our topics and use one essay to approach as many topics as possible. And that's a really important strategy when you are writing your essays. Otherwise, you'll write possibly up to like 50 essays, and we do not want to do that. So in general, your college applications, you probably have already gathered all of your other application materials by the time Thanksgiving is passed, because you've probably applied early. If you have not, you still want to be gathering your application materials, but most of your stuff is probably sent in already.
Still to get through, and I want to definitely talk about the some more of the college advising piece in the essays, which you just referenced, Kate. So let's go ahead and move forward into some other stuff. I want to talk a little bit about what do you do when you study, right? Like, okay, what does studying even mean? So first of all, there are 3. Now, studying for standardized tests is different than studying for academics. I mean, a lot of your academic studying is really just about rote memorization. It's like, I got to remember these things just for a few minutes for a short window of time, so I can just like put that stuff on the paper, and then it just washes it out of my brain. A lot of academics is sort of like that, and you can actually be pretty successful doing that. In fact, a lot of people who are very, very good at rote memorization have really good GPAs as a result of that. Because it's so heavily based on that concept. Studying for standardized tests is a lot different. There's a lot of concepts that are involved. There's synthesis between concepts. You could have, for example, a math question that's has some geometry in it, but also probabilities and things like that, where you wouldn't have normally seen that as a student at any point in time until now. And so studying for these things is different. And you want to get used to that fact and get used to studying in this certain type of way. So there are 3 different ways that you can study for a standardized test. One, and this is really, really important, this is an important element of it, is practice testing and evaluation. It's very, very important to know what you're getting yourself into. And the best thing to do in order to figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are and how much work you have in front of you is to just rip the Band-Aid off and take a test, take a practice test and find out where you are. Don't worry about the score so much, but focus mostly on the kinds of questions you're getting wrong, the ones you're getting right, and why. And so that's a really, really important way to start. The reason for that is because if you want to be efficient, you want to apportion more time to the stuff that represents your best opportunities to improve on the test than anything else. It's not the case that everything gets equal footing. You don't spend the same amount of time on a part of the test that you're really good at than you would at something where you need a lot of help. I mean, you're trying to gain the most points total that you can. So practice testing evaluation is a super important first step. After that, you don't want to do comprehensive review all the time, where you're seeing 100 different types of questions all the time, and you're never able to focus on any one thing in particular and improve on it. So the other type of study is after practice, testing, and evaluation, you isolate some areas where you need the most help, and you focus on those things. So the second type of study, focused study and review, where you carve out all geometry questions or all proportion questions or all questions that have to deal with subject verb conjugation or transitions or organizing a paragraph properly, whatever it is that's giving you the most trouble. You need first of all, the material to be able to do this. And then you need to be able to focus on those specific question types until you're better at them. At that point, you can reevaluate and figure out what you should focus on next. The third thing is a thing that a lot of people don't do, and I've found this so incredibly effective, especially in certain points during your study process, that I love to talk about it, and that's direct path study. What that is taking a set of questions, whether you've done them before or not. You can use old material or new material, but you have a set of questions where you already know what the correct answer is, and it's a great way. I always have my students warm up using this technique. They'll go ahead and do a set of 10 questions where the answers are all circled already. They're not trying to figure out which answer is right. They're trying to figure out why the right answer is right. And by doing that, you're only spending time on the correct path, a direct line from the question that you have and the correct answer. You're not sort of just wandering aimlessly around trying to figure out what's going on or why I think this is it, but no, I messed up. Oh, my answer's not there. Where do I do? All of that kind of stuff. It's good for your confidence. It's also really, really good to kind of set up muscle memory in your body. Like, you get a sense for what it feels like to be moving correctly in the right way through a question over and over again and doing it quickly and then moving to the next one, because you're spending all of your time on the correct path from the question to the answer choice. So that's another really valuable technique. Again, I usually have my students warm up that way before they dive into new material where they don't have the answer choices. So the next thing I want to talk about is what any particular study session should look like. So the very first thing that you should do is warm up, and you can warm up with a direct path study that we just talked about on the last slide. And that's just, it's basically warm up is to get your brain juices flowing and also a review of previous material. The more times you see material that you've already done before and you've already mastered, the more likely you are to retain it. It is, studying for these tests is very much like spinning plates. You're trying to hold on to as much knowledge as you possibly can before you go take the real test. And sometimes when you're focusing on one thing, you lose something else. Warming up with material that you've seen before is a great way to prevent that from happening. The next thing you want to do is move to instruction. So whatever it is that you've identified as the areas where you need the most help, you need to find some explanations for how those questions are solved. Whether it's reading from a book or getting help from a tutor or a class or watching videos on YouTube, whatever it is, this is the part where you're learning something. Then you can move on to number 3, which is where you're doing focused work on whatever it is, again, that you've identified as the area that you need to spend the most time on for that week. Then at the end, after you've done all of those things and you've kind of taken steps towards mastering a new concept, at the end, you do some practice where you mix everything together. Make it a test-like experience. You don't want to know which kinds of questions are coming at any point in time. And that's the very last step to any particular study session. How long is this process? Well, not too long, to be honest. And no student should ever be sitting down studying for 3 hours at a time. It's really way too long. Your attention completely falls off the table at a certain point. And you're really sort of setting yourself up for a situation where you're burning yourself out, which is never what we want to have happen. You can, people think that it's not a big deal to study for 3 hours at a time because it's like, well, I go to work and I work for 3 hours at a time. Yeah, but you already know what you're doing. Like, this is learning, which is different. And when you're learning, it's really, really important to break your study sessions up into small pieces. So, how long do these 4 steps take? Anywhere between 30 minutes to 90 minutes, but I would never go longer than that. And if you get to 90 minutes and you've kind of worked your way through this process, or even if you haven't, take a break. Go for a walk around, eat lunch, do something you enjoy, and then come back to it and do another study session if you need to study for an extended period of time. That is definitely the best approach. Anything to add to study sessions, Nick? Anything that you generally recommend for your students? I said it. I know.
So,
okay. You're right. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
And so this is a way to think about the different parts of your study. As you work, you're going to have stuff that you've seen before, and this bucket is going to fill up. And as you work, you're going to continue to take concepts and questions out of the other bucket, which is new things that you haven't seen or stuff that you're not really good at yet, right? And so as we're moving through the study process, warming up, instruction, focus, then mixing it up, you are basically taking stuff that you've seen before to warm up, and then moving into new concepts as you do instruction and focused work. You should also, at every single point in time, be evaluating your performance on things and have an idea in your head, or write them down, the ranked areas of opportunity that you have on the test. Knowing what your biggest areas of opportunity are at all times is the way you study efficiently, because you're always focused on the thing that'll get you the most points. And so that is a really important aspect of it as well. So as you are continuing to do instruction and do focused work, you're pulling those topics from your ranked areas of opportunity. And as you get better at something, let's say 1 week I'm focusing on proportions, that's my number one area of opportunity. If I master it over the course of a week, the next week it's not going to be number one anymore. It may not even be on the list at all, and I can move on to the other stuff on the list. All right. Next one. Let's talk about essays.
Geared mostly towards seniors, although juniors, it's definitely useful. We're going to give a really brief and abbreviated intro to essays, and really more talk about what we do here at A-List. If you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. We're going to start with a word on writer's block with Nick Misikowski. This is for our seniors, but also for everybody, because everyone has had writer's block during a writing assignment, and Nick has some awesome pointers.
So the very short version is that with a college essay particularly, right, that's generally, and actually is always, a story about yourself. And want to summarize it for 650 words, don't. You can talk about Marvel if you want, but make sure it relates to you somehow, right? So what I tend to tell students is, once we've decided on a story about them, particularly one where they've shown some sort of growth or change over the course of this experience, write what happened. It seems very simple, right? But students will often tell me, like, I don't know what to write next. And my answer is, what happened next, right? You lived it. And once you've decided on a story that, like, you want to tell, then just go step by step, right? Especially if you're experiencing some writer detail that you're like, this isn't really all that useful, or this wasn't the most, like, pertinent to this particular experience. All right, you can take it out later, but it's so much easier to pare down than to build up. So you may as well write everything that happened. Maybe you exercise wherein you just give yourself 5 minutes and force yourself to do nothing but write during that time. Those are some of my quick tips for getting words on the page.
Helpful. Yeah, it's also an exercise, and it's so cool to do that every once in a while. It's something that a lot of people just don't do, and then you sometimes surprise yourself when you just force yourself to write that way. Intro to the college essay.
All right, so we'll keep it fairly quick, and I just wanted to show you guys at the bottom left corner of your screen. I mean, truly, our advising and college advising in general works best from a customized standpoint, right? So we can actually see exactly where you are in your college application journey and recommend a roadmap for you. But also, if you're a senior and you have an essay that you want a quick consultation on, we can take 30 minutes and look at that essay and tell you how to get it to the next level. So definitely go ahead and book a free consultation with me if you would like. But we'll talk really quickly about the college essay. So what is the college essay? Most of you probably know or have heard of it. 650 words. It goes to every single college that you apply to. And it is supposed to tell basically your story, just as Nick had said. In general, I'm going to move ahead to talk directly about like what a great topic is, because that's what's really important when it comes to the college essay. And quickly, I will touch on the Big Ten, because I think this is something that is really good to use in Nick's writer's block exercise. Sit down for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 30 minutes, however long you need, and just free write a long list of things about you that you feel are really impressive about you as a student, or that you feel show who you are as a person. So these could be really tiny things, like I am a really good whistler, or they could be kind of bigger things like here are my academic goals. All of those things are really important, and you should write down and have in this list. Once you have a bigger list, you can pare down to the Big Ten. That will be really important when it comes to writing all of your college essays later. Oops, sorry.
That I would write down things that you think are impressive and even things you don't think are impressive, because oftentimes people
For sure. Yes, I think that was such a good point. I think one thing that's really important about the college essay is that it is the one thing that humanizes you and makes you an actual person in the college admissions officer's eyes. And how do we know that someone's a person? Well, we know that they have, like, they're fallible. They have things that they're not necessarily proud of. And you don't have to talk about something that you did that was absolutely terrible, but you can highlight some vulnerabilities that you have, because showing your vulnerability makes you a real person. And also showing vulnerability makes people more likable. In general, these colleges, like, one evaluation factor for admissions officers is how would this person be as a roommate? And I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't want a roommate who's like, who leaves dishes in the sink and is like, oh, I do my dishes perfectly every single time. So having that vulnerability is a really key factor to the college essay. And I always end up asking my students, what are you bad at? What's something that you wish you could be better at? What's something that's quirky about you? Because that's what sets you apart from other students. So on top of that, there's vulnerability that's key. Then there's also, what insight can you draw from that vulnerability, and what does it say about you as a person? That's kind of the magic, like, 1-2 punch, right? If you can show something that really makes you a human being and then also develop some kind of strong insight from it, then you've got a great college essay. In general, a topic is just a framework. What the real story needs to be is who you are as a person, not necessarily a student, but a person. And in fact, not really as a student, as a person. You can show that you're a great person, and that will implicitly show that you'll be a good student. So it's all about your personal experiences and how they've made you who you are. So it's fun in that way. I love the college essay. It's actually fun to talk about.
To let someone know that you're a good roommate is to tell them that you're really good about doing the dishes, Kate.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, of course, Kate, Scott, and Nick for outlining and sharing some great information with everyone here tonight. So of course, we just wanted to make sure that we optimize everyone's time here. You guys have done a really great job of bringing some questions to light, so really appreciate that. And you got the chance to meet and chat with 3 wonderful subject matter experts who helped kind of guide and direct you with the college advising and test prep process. So as a thank you for attending, not only do we want to have all of your questions answered here tonight, but we did want to make sure that if you do have additional questions that weren't covered, that you do have access to our team here. So with these last few minutes, if you guys have any questions, please throw them in the chat here. But I do want to wrap up by saying that we do have a free consultation opportunity where you will get the chance to chat with anyone here, as well as myself, to personalize some bundles for your students. And we do have a special offer, of course, for everyone who attended tonight. So if you do end up utilizing A-List Education Services and purchasing some hours of tutoring or college advising, if you buy 5 or more, you actually receive 2 free for attending this evening. So that's really exciting. I am going to just turn it over to the chat really quick to see if we have any questions that we need to answer. Is there anything here, Scott, that was flagged or anything else that we want to make sure that we cover? No? Okay, so hopefully you guys all took away some valuable information you guys can share with friends and family over some turkey next week. We hope you guys have a great Thanksgiving and hope we get the chance to connect with some of you parents here who came tonight. Thanks for using A-List Education as a continued resource, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks so much.